Welcome to the RJLT Economics. Today I want to talk about the riots in France. Specifically, I want to try to answer the question of why there are so many riots, violent riots in France and in Europe in general. Indeed, we're seeing that the riots that started in France is now spreading to nearby countries. So why? There are direct causes for this type of violent riots, and then there are indirect causes. First, I want to talk about the direct causes. And here there are a lot of speculations. I don't have any private or privileged information on this, but here are some possibilities, and don't be surprised if the reality is really a mix of these factors. So first, it could be foreign influence or some sort of foreign interference. And this could come from a range of players. Some of them we may not even be suspecting. But let me name one. I think this has been named before by some other commentators. But basically, we see that France is not completely in line with the European Union's foreign policy, and not completely in line with the foreign policy of the West. So that is somewhat suspicious. I want to stop here. Right. Another possibility is that, indeed, I think I listened to what Pepe Escobar said discussing these riots, and he mentioned organized crime, this element. And indeed, we see that a lot of criminals that are participating in these riots, they are not really rioting against the police, but they are using this as cover so as to steal whatever they can, and who knows, maybe in the process, maybe they traffic some drugs, etc. Basically, all under this cover of a period of social instability. You can carry out a lot of big deals with hundreds of millions or even billions in value. So that could be some organized crime participating in this, behind it. It could also be the far right. Essentially, they want to provoke this sort of violent, irrational behavior from essentially people of certain ethnicities, so as to galvanize, and in this case could be gaslight the French population, and to get their support to push for certain policies. And then there could be some police state establishment figures who also want this sort of reactions from these minority groups, so that they can push for harder law enforcement practices. They can push for more surveillance, less freedom, and that is not just for the minorities but also for the general public, right? I think these points are, or at least some sort of tangent of these points are touched on by Max Blumenthal and Aaron Mattei from the Gray Zone. So I want to give them credit for these thoughts. Now, of course, we must also admit that there are people who are predisposed to violence, and they're easily triggered. But since the reaction was so violent and so well coordinated, remember, this shooting took place, and then immediately there was violence, and the violence was not just in a single place, let's say the Parisian region, but across France, and that shows that some sort of coordination, and some people, some interests were organizing behind the scenes, and it is hardly. I don't think people who are irrational, who can easily be manipulated and used in this way, are at the same time so well organized to start these riots at the same time across the country. So I think directly there must be some forces behind the scenes pushing the buttons. But these are all speculations, and I'm not going to take responsibility for all these. And if the authorities don't agree with these points, they're free to take these down, because these are all, as I want to say again and again, perhaps at the end of this video, I want to emphasize again that these are all speculations. I have no privileged information. I have only heard people speculate, and I've also thrown in some of my own speculations. But the indirect reason, that's also a mix of reasons, and I think with these I'm much more confident. So what are these indirect reasons? And these are the fundamental reasons why we have the situation, particularly in France, because France is a particular case, but also in general in Europe, in Western Europe, there is this general issue. Now, I think this sort of race riots is also prevalent in North America, particularly in the United States. And there are some very deeply rooted reasons why this is so. And I think the most notable of that is it's some sort of segregation, right? I know that a lot of people are not very happy with this type of framing. They want to suggest that people are not racist, and I'm not saying that people are racists. People are not racist. Most French people that I've met are not racist, or at least not so racist, not explicitly racist. And France is certainly not the most racist country in Europe. And at the same time, I don't think it's the least racist, but that is besides the point. The thing about France and every country in general, right? Not just France, not just Europe, not just the West, but every country in general, is that a society is stratified. There are different layers of society. Some people are more privileged, and some other people are less privileged. But in a country such as France, and also like the United States, the way that the society economically is stratified also tend to have some correlation with the ethnicities. Whereas in large countries such as China, where I'm from, or India, actually India has this horrible caste system, so let's forget India. India is horrible in this sense. But China, everyone is most people are Chinese, Han Chinese. The majority of the people are Han Chinese. So even though there is a huge wealth gap, there is huge inequality, and there is problem with social mobility, the ossification of the society, and all the rest. Same problems. There are areas that are very well manicured, very well serviced, very well served, whereas there are other places where the public service is not so good. People live in poverty, the environment is heavily polluted, all the rest, right? Essentially, it's like two worlds. But because China has essentially the same ethnicity all across the country, it is more difficult to provoke this sort of internal frictions based on based on race, based on ethnicity. But in a place like France, where there is this huge section of the country that are how to say disproportionately poorer, disproportionately worse off, then this is actually a very fertile ground for all the sort of provocations of intrigues, right? And the French society is not without its fault, because they essentially invited those people to work in France, in the factories, in the car factories in particular, in the 1950s and 60s. And they came, a lot of people, you see, there are a lot of right-wing people on social media. They say this is a problem with immigration. But the thing is, these people, they came to France, to the metropolitan France, from France, because those places, North African countries, now they are countries, they are independent. But before, at that point, they were fully integrated. Algeria was fully integrated part of France. So you can't say that they were immigrants. They just moved to a different place. It's pretty much like people who move from I don't know, North Dakota to Texas. They are not really immigrants in that sense, right? But of course, you could say somewhat a migrant. But that's besides the point. So first, they're not really immigrants, and secondly, as has always been the case with the economic immigrants, things tend to actually be much milder. People, usually the first generation economic immigrants, hard workers, they come from a backgrounds, their home country that they left for a better economic future, for better economic environment, for more opportunities, for better economic opportunities, and they remember what is back home, what it's like back home, and they tend to appreciate the improvements, even though their positions are not so good in the new country, right? It is usually the third generation, the fourth generation immigrants that tend to start have problems, and this is where the responsibility, I think, of the French state, of the past French state and the past European states are really very evident here, which is that they did not provide specifically, they did not pay attention to provide good education opportunities, good social mobility to these people. Now, a lot of people can say that France is economically not doing so well, and even the white French people are not doing so well. And I know that to be true. White people in France, if they are from underprivileged backgrounds, if working class, for example, they're not doing well. They are rather poor, in fact, and France is a costly country to live in. But that does not excuse the French state from their failures, because you have to foresee the problem down the road, and sometimes a little bit of reverse racism is necessary. I hate to say this, but you have the immigrants already in your state. If you don't provide a bit more opportunity for those for their offsprings, for their children, what you get down the line is that you will have these type of segregation problems. You need to spend more resources on these children, so that they are better integrated into a society. That is the only way to make sure that down the line you can avoid the situation that France is having. Now, given the situation that it is really difficult to see any solution, any resolution to this situation, because the segregation is deeply rooted, and France as a state lacks the resources, and there are just simply too many people with these immigrant backgrounds, and they're not immigrants anymore. They are fourth or fifth generation, but at the same time, they have this quote-unquote social stigma. Some people call it institutionalized racism, and there are. I know that a lot of right-wing people don't want to admit this, but it is true that people from backgrounds where if you're in most of these European countries, let's say, if you didn't go to the right school, or if your family name does not sound very good, or indeed if your address is from a place that is that they don't like, then you don't get the job, you don't get the opportunity, and this basically means that people who may otherwise be rather talented have little opportunity to actually realize their potential. And of course, some people, and in fact, when people are not so talented, when people are not so motivated, is less of a problem, because they accept that maybe they can work in the factory, maybe they can work on a farm, or maybe they can work to clean the streets or whatever, do some low skill jobs, and then maybe they are satisfied. But when people are more motivated, when people are more ambitious, this is where the reality hits them very hard, and these people they are ripe to be radicalized, and there are certainly forces, domestic and foreign, in France and in Europe in general, that want to see mayhem for whatever reason, and there are multiple, and they don't necessarily coordinate with each other, but they have a constant supply of vulnerable people who can be used, who can be taken advantage of, right? And then at the same time, we must also admit that a lot of the media, a lot of the games. I know that Macron has been ridiculed for his mention of these points, but I think it's a valid point. In fact, even the teen who was shot, I think from what I've read in the news, what he did, his behavior was quite akin to some things for what is depicted in some of the games. And I would also say that the behavior of the police in the beginning are somewhat similar to what I have seen in some films. And so also the rioters, some of their behavior is exactly what you see in films. And then not just in films, but also I think the news media is to blame as well, because if you remember a few years ago, during the last years of the Trump administration, there was this Black Lives Matter movement, which began as a peaceful protest, but then there were elements that were looting and rioting that were mixed in, and a lot of the media, for whatever reason, for whatever motive that I don't want to talk about now, but I think people have their own thoughts and explanations. Those people were so praised by most of the media, and media in Europe as well. So it is not surprising that the vulnerable people who are predisposed to resent the system having been exposed to media, to films, to games, to news outlets that essentially praise such behavior, are easily manipulated into these behavior at the present day. So I think there are deep social causes. I think if the French system, the administration, and the Europeans in general can manage this well, they may see in the future the protests. They can manage it such that in the future protests or riots, even when they take place, they are less violent. They are less coordinated. And they are, perhaps even less frequent. But to really resolve this issue, you need to resolve the deeply rooted social problem. But currently, Europe and France lack the resources, lack the economic opportunities to fix this issue. So it's something that you just have to live with this situation, right? Fundamentally, one last thing I want to say. Fundamentally, any social problem is an economic problem. Not any, but most social problems are economic problems. And here, in this case, it is clearly an economic problem being first and foremost. And unfortunately, France and Europe lack the financial economic resources to solve this problem. And so this problem has to go on, and all that can be done is to mitigate the effects. All right, thanks for listening. As I said previously, I'm posting a lot of photos from my road trip in South China on my website. So go to drjlt.com and see some of those photos. Thank you very much. Have a great day.